5 o'clock in the morning. Not the darkness. Not the cold floor. Not even the alarm screaming into a silent room. The thumb. That's the moment. Right there. A thumb, hovering over a phone screen, half an inch from a button that says, snooze. A man lying in the dark, doing the same math he's done 400 mornings in a row. 5 more minutes won't matter. And here's what nobody tells you about that thumb. It isn't tired. It isn't weak. It's trained. Trained by 400 mornings of getting exactly what it wanted. Trained the way you train anything. Through repetition, through permission, through the quiet absence of a fight. And on this particular morning, something different happens. Not a lightning bolt. Not some grand awakening set to music. Just a thought. Small, sharp, uninvited. I know exactly how this ends. Because he's seen this movie before. He's lived this exact morning, this exact decision, this exact 5 minutes that turns into 15, that turns into a rushed shower, that turns into a day that runs him instead of the other way around. He's seen where this road goes because he's already walked it 400 times. And for the first time, lying there in the dark, he doesn't see a tired man. He sees a pattern, and patterns, real ones, the kind that build or destroy a life. They don't announce themselves. They just repeat, quietly, politely. Every single morning, until one day you look up and 20 years have gone by, built entirely out of 5-minute surrenders you don't even remember making. This is not a story about mornings. This is a story about who's actually in charge. The hour nobody fights for. Nobody claps when you get up at 5. Say that out loud and let it sit for a second, because it matters more than it sounds like it should. There's no crowd, no highlight reel, no one checking whether you did it. The 5 a.m. hour is the most unsupervised hour of your entire day. No boss watching, no partner awake, no algorithm tracking your effort. Just you, a dark room, and a decision that belongs entirely to you. And that's exactly why it's dangerous. Because anything nobody's watching is the first thing we let slide. Think about every area of your life where you actually show up. Work, appearances, the things people can see. You show up there because there's a consequence. A boss notices. A friend notices. Somebody, somewhere, is keeping score. But at 5 a.m., in the dark, alone, the only scorekeeper is you. And most of us, if we're honest, are terrible referees for our own lives. We let ourselves off. We negotiate. We find the exception that feels reasonable in the moment and devastating in hindsight. Here's the part that should unsettle you. The hour with no audience is the hour that tells the truth about who you actually are. Not who you say you are at the dinner table. Not who you post about online. Who you actually are, when nothing and no one is holding you accountable except the version of yourself who made a promise the night before. Most men never find out who that person is because they never stay in the room with them long enough. They hit snooze, and the question disappears along with the alarm. But the question doesn't actually disappear. It just moves down the road, unanswered, waiting for you at 5 a.m. tomorrow, and the morning after that, and every morning until you finally either answer it or spend a life being quietly defined by your refusal to. The man who kept choosing comfort at 5:01. Let me tell you about a man, not a specific man, every man, the one who never had a single catastrophic failure. No rock bottom, no public collapse, nothing anyone would ever point to and say, that's where it went wrong. He just had 5:01. Every single morning of his adult life, at 5:01, he made one decision. Small, reasonable, defensible. I'll get up in a few minutes. This one time doesn't matter. And he was right. It didn't matter. Not that morning, not that week, not even that year. That's the trap. Nothing about 5:01 ever feels like the moment your life is being decided. It feels like nothing. It feels like rest, like mercy, like the one kindness you're allowed to show yourself in an unkind world. And that feeling is exactly why it works on you, because no one builds their life around one bad decision. They build it, brick by invisible brick, around 10,000 small ones that each felt too minor to matter. He wasn't failing at life. Understand that clearly, because it's the part people miss. He wasn't lazy, wasn't undisciplined in the way people mean when they use that word as an insult. He was winning. Consistently, at a smaller version of the life he actually wanted. Every snooze was a small, private victory over the man he claimed he wanted to become. And small, private victories, repeated daily, are how ordinary men quietly build extraordinary regret. By 35, he had a story ready for anyone who asked why things hadn't quite worked out the way he planned. Bad timing, bad luck. A boss who didn't see his potential. An economy that wasn't fair to people like him. and every story had a grain of truth in it. The world really is unfair sometimes. But underneath every story, if he'd ever had the courage to look, was the same quiet fact. He had been given the same 24 hours as every man who did build the life he wanted, and he had surrendered the first hour of it, every single day, without a fight. You don't lose your life in the loud moments. You lose it in the quiet ones you don't even remember choosing. The morning that broke the pattern. But that wasn't the truth. It was just the easiest lie to believe at 5 a.m. I'm not a morning person. Say it enough times and it stops sounding like an excuse and starts sounding like a diagnosis. Something permanent, something written into you at birth, something you're not responsible for. That's the genius of the lie. It moves the blame from your choices to your nature. And once something feels like your nature, you stop fighting it. Why fight who you are? Except it was never who you are. It was just what you'd practiced. Here's the moment the pattern actually breaks. Not with motivation, not with some external event forcing your hand, but with a single, uncomfortable piece of arithmetic. 400 mornings, 400 identical decisions, 400 votes cast for the same version of yourself. And you finally ask the question you've been avoiding. If I've been voting for this man every single morning, why am I surprised he's the one who showed up? That question doesn't feel like inspiration. It feels like exposure, like being caught. Because you have been caught. Not by anyone else, but by the only witness who was ever actually in the room. Yourself. And here's where most people, reading this, feel the urge to defend themselves, to explain the circumstances, the job that drains them, the kids who kept them up, the year that broke them. All real. None of it changes the arithmetic. Because underneath every circumstance is still a decision, made new every single morning, completely independent of what happened yesterday. The alarm doesn't know how hard your week was. It doesn't care. It just asks the same question, at the same hour, waiting for the same honest answer you've been avoiding for years. Who's actually deciding this? That question is the crack. Everything after this is what grows out of it. What the alarm actually tests. The alarm was never testing your sleep. You've been treating it like a biological event. A measurement of how tired your body is, how much rest you got, how depleted your energy happens to be on any given morning. But that's not what it's testing. It never was. It's testing your word. Somewhere the night before. Maybe out loud. Maybe just in your head. You made yourself a promise. Tomorrow I get up. And the alarm isn't checking your sleep debt. It's checking whether the man who made that promise is the same man who's about to break it. It's the single most honest audit you'll face all day. Because it happens before the world has a chance to interfere. Before excuses have had time to accumulate. Before anyone else's needs have entered the room. Just you, and a promise, and 60 seconds to decide if your word means anything. Think about how much of your frustration with your own life actually traces back to this. Not a lack of ambition. Most men have plenty of that, late at night, when it's easy and costs nothing. The gap isn't ambition. It's the space between what you promise yourself in the dark of planning and what you actually deliver in the dark of execution. And that gap has a name. It's called the 5 a.m. alarm. Every time you keep the promise, something happens that has nothing to do with waking up early and everything to do with who you now know yourself to be. You become, in that instant, a man whose word is reliable. At least to himself. And a man who can trust his own word in the dark, alone, with nothing to gain and no one watching, is a fundamentally different kind of man than one who can't. That's what the alarm actually tests. Not your tiredness, your integrity, measured in its smallest, most honest unit. The discipline nobody sees. No one's watching you at 5 a.m. That's exactly why it's the only discipline that's real. We've built entire lives around performed discipline. The version of ourselves we bring out when there's an audience. The gym selfie. The public commitment. The New Year's post everyone sees and half of us abandon by February. Performed discipline is easy because it's motivated by two things that have nothing to do with actual character. Being seen and being judged. Take away the audience and most performed discipline evaporates instantly. Because it was never really about the discipline. It was about the performance. But 5 a.m. has no audience, no likes, no witnesses, no social consequence for failing. Which means whatever discipline survives that hour is the only discipline you actually own. Not the version you present to the world, but the version that exists when the world isn't looking. This is the part almost nobody talks about. Because it's not glamorous, and it doesn't make for a good highlight reel. The disciplines that change your life are almost always the invisible ones. The ones no one applauds. The ones that would look, to an outside observer, like absolutely nothing happened. A man got up. He didn't win an award. He didn't post about it. He just got up, alone, in the dark, and kept a promise that only he would ever know about. And that's precisely why it compounds. Public discipline needs constant renewal, new applause, new witnesses, new reasons to keep performing. Private discipline needs nothing but your own word, and once you've proven to yourself, in the silence, that your word is good, that becomes the foundation everything else gets built on. Not motivation, not inspiration, just the accumulated, unwitnessed evidence that when you say you'll do something, you do it. That evidence is the only currency that actually matters in the long run. And you can only earn it in the hour nobody's watching. You weren't tired. You were untrained. Here's where most men quit, right at the edge of this realization, because it's easier to keep believing you're tired than to accept that you're untrained. Tired is temporary. Tired is sympathetic. Tired lets you off the hook, because tired implies the problem will resolve on its own, given enough rest, given enough time. Untrained is different. Untrained means the problem is a skill you haven't built yet. And skills don't resolve on their own. They require repetition, discomfort, and the specific kind of humility it takes to admit you're not good at something yet. Nobody is born able to get up at 5 a.m. without a fight. That's not a character flaw. It's simply a skill nobody trained you in. Your body wasn't designed to make this easy. Comfort is the default setting of every human nervous system. Discomfort is always going to require a decision layered on top of instinct. The question was never whether getting up early feels hard. It always will, at least at first. The question is whether you've trained the part of you that decides anyway. This is the exact moment the whole framework flips. Willpower was never the answer, because willpower is a finite resource that depletes with every use. Ask anyone who's tried to white-knuckle their way through a habit and watched it collapse under stress. What survives stress isn't willpower. It's identity. Not, I'm trying to be a person who gets up early, but I am a person who gets up early. A settled fact about yourself that doesn't require renegotiation every single morning, because it's no longer a decision. It's just who you've become. The exhaustion was never the enemy. The enemy was ease. The quiet, reasonable, endlessly available permission to stay exactly who you already were. And that's not a flaw in your biology. That's just a habit you haven't built yet. The twist, 5 a.m. was never about the morning. And what happened next changed everything. Not a dramatic morning, not some cinematic before and after. Just a quiet reversal in how the whole problem was being understood. Because for years, the goal had been framed as becoming a morning person. As if there was some magical category of human being, wired differently, who simply enjoyed early mornings the way other people enjoyed sleeping in. Chase that identity long enough and you'll always fail, because it was never a real category to begin with. It's a myth built to explain why some people succeed and others don't, without forcing anyone to look at the actual mechanism underneath. Here's the mechanism. 5 a.m. was never about the morning. It was about becoming a man who keeps his word before the world wakes up and starts making demands on it. That's the whole rule, stripped down to what it actually is. Not a productivity hack, not a biohacking trend, a daily proof, repeated until it becomes structural, that your word to yourself outweighs your comfort. Once you see it this way, the entire framing shifts. You're no longer trying to enjoy something you may never enjoy. You're building evidence, one morning at a time, of exactly the kind of man you actually are when nothing forces your hand. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Every other discipline in your life is downstream of this one. The diet you can't stick to. The business you keep almost starting. The relationship patterns you keep repeating. All of it sits on the same foundation. Whether your word to yourself, in private, means something. And there is no cheaper, more repeatable, more available way to build that foundation than the 60 seconds after your alarm goes off. This is the moment the whole story reorganizes itself. It was never really about the morning. It was about who's actually deciding your life. And finally, for the first time, taking that job back. Rebuilding the first 60 seconds. Change the first 60 seconds of your day, and eventually you change the entire shape of your life. Here's why that first minute carries so much weight. It's the only moment of the day completely untouched by outside pressure. No email has arrived yet. No one has asked anything of you yet. The world hasn't had a chance to set the agenda. Whatever you do in that first 60 seconds is the purest expression of what you actually value, because nothing external is influencing the decision. Most men spend that minute in retreat, reaching for the phone, scrolling into someone else's highlight reel, letting the first input of the day be noise instead of intention. and that single choice sets a tone that echoes for hours. You don't decide your day at 9 a.m. when the real problems show up. You decide it in the dark, at 5 a.m., in the 60 seconds before your feet touch the floor. So the rebuild starts small. Smaller than most men expect, because the goal was never to overhaul your entire life overnight. The goal is to win the first 60 seconds, consistently, until winning them stops requiring effort and starts requiring nothing but memory. Feet on the floor before the second thought arrives. No negotiation with the version of you that wants 5 more minutes, because negotiation is exactly how 5 minutes becomes 50. The rule isn't complicated. It's just uncomfortable, which is precisely why it works. Understand this. The goal was never to become a man who loves waking up early. Some mornings will always be hard. The goal is to become a man whose actions in the first 60 seconds no longer depend on how he feels. Because feelings are unreliable narrators, and a life built on obeying them will always drift toward the path of least resistance. Rebuild that first 60 seconds, and you're not just changing your mornings. You're changing which version of yourself gets to run the rest of the day. The hour that out-earns the other 23. One disciplined hour doesn't sound like much, until you realize it's the only hour that decides who shows up for the other 23. Here's the compounding effect nobody explains clearly enough. The man who wins the 5 a.m. hour doesn't just gain an hour of extra productivity. He gains evidence. Fresh, daily, undeniable evidence that he is someone who follows through. And that evidence doesn't stay contained to the morning. It bleeds into every decision that follows. The hard conversation he'd normally avoid. The workout he'd normally skip. The task he'd normally push to tomorrow. All of it becomes slightly easier, because the man making those decisions at 2 p.m. is not the same man who negotiated with himself at 5 a.m. He's already proven, once today, that he can do the hard thing anyway. This is the actual mechanism behind why early risers so often outperform in areas that have nothing to do with waking up early. It was never really about the extra hour of quiet productivity, though that helps. It's about identity transfer. The way a single act of discipline in the dark quietly rewrites how you show up in the light. Compare that to the alternative. The man who loses the 5 a.m. hour doesn't just lose 60 minutes of sleep or an early start. He starts his entire day having already broken a promise to himself, and that fracture, subtle as it is, follows him. It's harder to trust your own resolve at 3 p.m. when you already know, somewhere underneath, that this morning you didn't keep your word. 1 hour. Out-earning the other 23. Not because of what gets done in it, but because of who you prove yourself to be the moment it starts. The new man becomes the old habit. And this was the beginning of the new me. Not a dramatic morning. Not a single cinematic turning point you could point to on a calendar. Just a Tuesday. An ordinary, forgettable Tuesday where getting up came first, before the negotiation even had time to start. No internal battle. No dramatic willpower moment. Just a body that moved before the mind had a chance to object, because it had done this enough times that the pattern had quietly become the new default. This is what nobody tells you about real transformation. It doesn't arrive the way it's portrayed. There's no single morning where the music swells and everything changes forever. What actually happens is smaller and, in its own way, more remarkable. The new behavior stops requiring a decision. It becomes structural. The thing you once had to fight for every single day becomes the thing you'd now have to fight against if you wanted to go back to the old version. That's the real finish line, and it's almost invisible when it happens. You won't feel triumphant. You'll just notice, one ordinary morning, that you didn't think about it. You just got up. The 400 mornings of negotiation are gone, replaced by something that no longer asks your permission. The new man doesn't feel new anymore. He just feels like you. And that quiet, unremarkable Tuesday, the one where nothing dramatic happened, is exactly the proof that the transformation is real. Because real change was never supposed to feel like a movie. It was supposed to feel like nothing at all, because it had finally become who you are. Who you are at 5 a.m. is who you are. You are not becoming a different man. You are finally becoming the man your mornings have been describing all along. This is the truth underneath everything we've walked through. Your life was never going to be decided in the big, visible moments you always assumed mattered most. It was being decided quietly, every single day, in the 60 seconds after your alarm went off, long before anyone else was awake to witness it. That hour was never separate from your life. It was your life, compressed into its most honest form. Every promise you kept in the dark built something. Every promise you broke also built something, just not the thing you wanted. There is no neutral option here. The 5 a.m. hour was always writing your story, whether you were paying attention or not. So when you ask who you really are, not who you present at work, not who you claim to be in conversation, but who you actually are underneath all of it, the answer has been available the entire time. It's written in what you do in the 60 seconds nobody sees. That's not a metaphor. That's the most literal definition of character available to you. What you do when it costs you something and no one is watching. You didn't need to become someone else. You needed to start listening to what your mornings had already been telling you. 5 a.m. for the rest of your life. This isn't a video you finish. It's an hour you start keeping. Tomorrow, and the morning after that, and the one after that, for as long as you intend to become the man you keep saying you want to be. There's no dramatic conclusion here, no final twist to wrap this up neatly, because the story doesn't actually end. It just continues tomorrow at 5 a.m., in the dark, alone, with the same 60 seconds waiting for you that have always been waiting for you. The only thing that changes is whether you show up for them. You already know what happens if you don't. You've lived that version. You know exactly how many mornings it takes to build a life you didn't choose on purpose. So here's the only rule that matters, stripped of everything else. Tomorrow, when the alarm goes off, don't negotiate. Don't reach for the phone. Don't give the old voice 60 seconds to make its case. Just move. Feet on the floor before the thought fully forms. That's it. That's the whole rule. Not motivation, not inspiration. Just a promise, kept quietly, in the dark, one morning at a time. Until one day, without ever announcing it to anyone, you look up and realize you've become someone else entirely. 5 o'clock is waiting. This time, don't keep it waiting for you.